So why was this brought up this week?
Well, these briefings actually happen all the time. ASIO gives annual briefings and regular updates to law enforcement and so forth. But, this is something that has become newsworthy over the last year or so, possibly because it made a change from reporting on coronavirus, but also because, thanks to social media and thanks to people's awareness of violent extremism around the world, this is a topic that people care about. Now, given that most of society have spent much of last year, in lockdown and so forth, as we move back to what, depending who you ask, is the new normal or the way things were, there's going to be a lot of people coming off the couch and, looking to perhaps commit acts of violent extremism, which would almost be a coup de grace after the shocking economic downturn and social downturn that people have had. The other problem is that given that we have a situation now where people can be radicalised online, there have been people who have been sitting at home online doing not much else for the last year, and their anger, their frustration at all elements of society, including government, including organised religion, migrant groups, ethnic groups, target groups, has potentially been weaponised over the last year, which means that the ambient threat level rises, and of course that's on a predictive basis over and above actual attacks which continue to take place and have taken place over the last 12 months.
What about the counter view that people could have done it during COVID-19? I mean, no one had locked them to their couch, so if there was going to be a terrorist attack, it could have happened over the past year or so, but things have quietened substantially from a worldwide perspective. Well,
it also depends on the nature of an attack. I mean, if you're referring to, say, an attack on a mass gathering, well, there were no mass gatherings. There weren't that many opportunities to necessarily wage violence on a large group of people, but we're sort of moving
There's still
back
people in shopping centres and other things. So it's where do you think the mentality's at?
Well, look, attacks have happened. I mean, just this week, there was an attack on a guest house, suicide bombing that killed 30 people. Now, this happened in the Middle East. Most people probably didn't read about it. These are almost sort of ordinary events that happen. We've had close to 40,000 Islamist attacks since 9/11, and we're approaching the 40,000 mark. So these things do happen continually, and perhaps they get to the point where they're almost not newsworthy, which is why there is perhaps a focus now in the broader populace toward what's been called sort of right-wing extremism and white supremacism and so forth, moving away from perhaps the Islamist terrorism, even though that threat hasn't gone away. ASIO has reported or has advised that the threats are going to come from a wider spectrum than perhaps previously, and so they're broadening their focus. Now, that's not to say that any of these are a new threat. They're not. Left-wing extremism, right-wing extremism.
We saw it on the White House, didn't we? That had to be a form of it, didn't it? Just a few months ago.
I mean, the other thing that's changed is traditionally we would look at, say, left-wing extremism, right-wing extremism, religious or Islamist extremism in the middle. But now there's this sort of interesting kind of a la carte approach, because you might have people who, thanks to social media, thanks to what they're seeing online, they might, on the one hand, have problems against migration, have problems against certain ethnic groups, and that traditionally might fit into perhaps one sort of style of extremism, but at the same time they're also fiercely anti-government, anti-law enforcement, and that once upon a time would have come from another spectrum. So it's almost like these things are sort of cherry-picking and being turned into this like great sort of evil force that, of course, once it gets angry enough, can actually turn to genuine acts of violence. And so I think this is why ASIO are trying to sort of move away from putting everyone into neat little categories, which I think on the one hand is sensible because it stops people looking for a particular thing and perhaps missing something else. So I'll give you an example. When I speak to organisations about being careful to look out for things that might indicate a terrorist act, if you're looking for something that looks like it came out of a B-grade movie and it has a particular, it basically looks like a terrorist straight out of the movie, you're going to miss what could actually be a real threat, because not everybody looks the same way, acts the same way, and so forth. But if you look at these things overall, if you, say, prepare your organisation and you have a security management plan to deal with, say, an active shooter, it doesn't matter if that person is left wing, right wing, this, that, the other. It's the same threat, and that sort of approach to taking care of it means that you are going to be prepared to deal with it without pigeonholing anything.
Can I just quickly ask, so the new umbrella terms from ASIO, what are your thoughts on that now called religiously motivated violent extremism and ideology-motivated violent extremism?
Right, so ASIO basically said ideologically motivated violent extremism and religious motivated. Now, funnily enough, I think the two actually go hand in hand. So you sort of probably can't have one without the other. And some would say that, for example, certainly with Islamist terror, there's a lot of ideological focus that goes above and beyond the pure religious component of it. I understand why ASIO have done that. Certainly with the Islamic community, it's always been very difficult because there are people in that community who are genuinely helpful in preventing these attacks, and it's important that they be supported and that they be empowered to do that, because in many cases they take huge risks speaking up and trying to prevent these things, and they need our support. But at the same time, I think Australians aren't stupid, and not calling a spade is sometimes creates problems as well. So, it would be very interesting to know whether ASIO is saying one thing in public, but they're probably not renaming the desks and the intel analysts within their organisation either.
Yeah.